Karis painter. This is Moves Unfiltered. We explore the dance communities of Philadelphia. We learn how dance is a vehicle of culture, conveying traditions, music, and history. I'm a dancer, an advocate, a storyteller. Come with us as we explore Moves Unfiltered.
Proven to be effective, that's the only way I would go back into the classroom. When you have other options right now, remote learning and all that, I think I would make every possible effort to do that, to teach by via the computer.
Absolutely. Would you send your children to school given the current situation?
No, I would not. I would not. So it's a very difficult choice. I mean, as I said before, for the authorities, for mayors and governors and everybody to balance that, the need to have an educational system that is functioning in the midst of a pandemic. And that's like, how do you do that? And all the scientists agree that the first step for us to recover from COVID-19 is to have the educational system back at work so that parents can go back to the office, to whatever work they have. So if there are no schools open, the parents cannot go anywhere.
It is very fascinating. I read that Dr. Sanjay Gupta would not send his kids back to school if the schools were open, that his children do go to, that he felt it wasn't unsafe, especially given that so many, especially children, are asymptomatic.
Mm-hmm.
He noted a study, I believe it was in China, that 90% of children with COVID-19 have very mild or moderate symptoms. And so you often don't see that.
Well, this is anecdotal, but when I was a teacher, every September I could count on getting a cold the first week of school. That always happened. Until I discovered that I could have a flu shot, and then I would protect myself. But for years, I suffered with colds in September.
Definitely. I remember when I taught first grade, it was so common for students to, you're standing right next to them, you're sitting in the little chairs, you're interacting with them, for them to just sneeze on you because they're learning to use their hands, and depending on their parenting. And there were often times where I would have to turn to the student and say, "You just coughed on my face." Of course, I wouldn't say it like that.
But now that cough could be deadly. That's what the problem.
Totally. And if not on the teacher, on other students, on schools have so many different levels and ages of workers, from cafeteria workers to custodial workers to the nurses, that everybody's going home to their families to be spreading the virus in school. And it's interesting that there's such a push to reopen schools, given that many of these big technology companies have said we're going to continue to be remote for a year. I think Google announced that they were going to be remote until July 2021.
Right, because I mean, the forecast is that by then there will be a vaccine available. I mean, they're working really at record pace to come up with a vaccine that works. And there are hundreds of entities and individuals engaged in that effort. But there's nothing yet. We don't know.
Absolutely.
And they keep talking, certain segments keep talking about this what is it?
Uh,
Chloroquine, chloroquine, I don't know how to pronounce it.
yes.
Chloroxychloroquine. Okay.
Yes.
And that doesn't work. That doesn't work. I mean, it doesn't
Well,
work injecting Lysol into your veins either. Don't do that.
well, and that particular medication is used by people for other things, and that by using it for something that's off label because the president believes that that's what it is without a medical background is probably not the best course.
Right. So anyway,
Generally, we follow medical advice before we take a medication.
exactly. And I think after November, hopefully we will be listening more to the scientists and not so much to the politicians. And let's see the results of the November 3rd election. Now, somebody was saying, concentrate on this being an election month, an election period. It's not a matter of one day, because that is what Trump and other people will say. Oh, we don't know the results, so this is not a valid election. It's an election month. There is no limit to the time needed to count the votes. There is no period which is required, except obviously it has to be before the new term begins. But
absolutely.
But they have more than a month to count votes. So we shouldn't panic if we don't know the results the next morning after November 3rd.
Absolutely. And it's a very special time. It is interesting that there's not more discussion around the actual voting, given that companies such as Facebook, Google are remote now, and yet we're asking people to go into their polling places and vote.
Mm-hmm. Well, because they're doing everything possible to squash the vote of minority groups, especially. So
absolutely, it's interesting. Before we got on the air, I was telling you that I often look at some people's Instagram accounts to see what they're posting, and Ivanka Trump posts about empowerment of women, and part of that empowerment of women, of minorities, that has come up in the news because of the Black Lives Matter protests in relation to the George Floyd death, is not suppressing their right to vote. So if we really believe that minorities' voices matter, they matter in the workplace, they matter at the polls. And so we should be finding ways to make sure that that is done according to a democratic process.
Right. Well, the whole the whole idea. Well, there are two things here now, since both are topics right now: the post office and the vote. The post office is enshrined in the Constitution. It's the one thing that is in the Constitution of the U.S. There is an item that specifies the existence of the post office. Number one. Number two, the guarantee of the vote. And so I don't know why the Republicans are intent on stopping both, destroying the post office and stopping the vote. What's that about? So,
well, they don't want the people who are not happy with them to have their votes matter.
My friend and colleague, Iris Violeta, mentioned a couple of things. And one of them was the whole Saul Alinsky, you know about him? Saul Alinsky? Anyway, no. He wrote a book about 8 ways in which a country installs a Marxist government. And some of those aspects are already present, trying to undermine the institutions, destroy the whole idea of the media, manipulate the healthcare situation. So there are 8 ways in which that could happen, to have a Marxist state. And Mr. Castro practiced that art to a T, and he spread his revolution throughout Latin America, as we know. So are we heading in the direction of a authoritarian government? Is that what we're doing here? By negating, but people are not sure Mr. Trump will admit defeat no matter what happens. And they are not sure he will want to leave the White House. Maybe they'll have to drag him by his legs out of the White House because he's not going to accept defeat.
It's very interesting. I wanted to ask you about we were talking about education and being in schools. I believe it was last week that the student in the school in Georgia posted the picture of all the students and then was subsequently suspended. And then the suspension was taken away, especially after news reports picked up on it.
Right.
And then they had to cancel several days of school this week because there were 9 reported cases, if not in the school, in the district.
Right.
Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's the whistleblower mentality. So, and we know that leaders, institutions do not like whistleblowers in general, but nobody can stop the spread of news via the internet because people have phones. Everybody has phones. And so that is a way to relay news instantly to the number of people you're connected with. So it goes to them, and then it goes wild on the internet. The news spread everywhere. So you cannot contain that. There's no way to control news the way it was possible at other times. So that also militates against the whole idea of an all-powerful government that controls everything. That makes it very difficult, even for China and Russia, although they managed to do that in so many ways. But it's not as easy for them because now people have other means of getting news to the outside, except North Korea. Have you heard anything about North Korea?
I have not heard much about North Korea.
Nothing. I don't hear any news about that. But anyway, going back to the whole idea of education that way, is in a way it's a lesson for the kids. You know, here you are, freedom of speech, freedom to communicate, freedom to relay news about what you know to the outside world, to people who are not in your group, and so it's a lesson for the kids.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that the student was suspended, which means the student wasn't in school. So maybe there was the student didn't have to be exposed to the virus. But the superintendent said that he could not mandate masks. And one of the reporters said, well, if you can have a dress code, can't you mandate masks?
Absolutely. That's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous concept. In fact, there is a call for more and more governors. This is what the scientists are saying. More and more governors should require everybody to wear a mask, period. It's the only way we're going to stop this, because even with a vaccine, we're not going to stop it unless people start taking steps to control it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And other countries have done this. This is not, I think that's always interesting to watch when the US doesn't want to do something that other countries have done.
Right. Well, there's a little light at the end of the tunnel. The sports world has adopted somehow the European soccer leagues were able to do it without an audience. You know, they had the games, they had the competition without public, without stadiums full of people getting sick with COVID.
This was in Europe?
Yes. So the Premier League in England and the league in Spain and Italy, they all did it. In fact, today there's a great game. Barcelona is the Spanish team that is playing today at 3 p.m. So
You know exactly what time.
if you're a soccer enthusiast, there you are. That's today's game. I forgot that Barcelona is playing a German team, I believe. So we'll see.
Interesting.
And I think, oddly enough, Barcelona is the underdog. Barcelona used to be one of the dominant teams. It has been for decades. But today, they are the underdog against the Germans for some reason. I don't know.
Is it because of the makeup of the team? Who's on the team? It's
Uh,
coaching.
I think because Barcelona has not been playing well this season, and the Germans have been very dominant. So they have great players on both sides. I mean, Barcelona has some of the best players in the world right now. Yeah, they have Messi, supposed to be number one in the world, and so they could be anyway. Good competition, but so I'm happy to see that. I mean, so once in a while you hear some positive news, and this is that it's possible to do to carry out some of these competitions without getting people sick. I mean, but the tennis world has suffered. They were not able to have the French Open or the Wimbledon and all that. So, and the U.S. Open is canceled, I think.
Why was Wimbledon couldn't the players still play, especially given how far apart they are?
Well, they didn't want to play. The main stars announced that they would not participate in the French Open or in that, like Nadal and other competitors said they wouldn't go anywhere. So Federer, I think Federer was for health reasons he was not going to play anyway. But anyway, this is a conversation for another.
No, I'm fascinated as someone who's not a huge sports follower. I understand the value that it offers to many people in terms of watching and playing. I think that was sad when some of these leagues in the U.S. for college sports announced that they weren't going to play, but at the same time, it would be a breeding ground for the virus to spread. But for many young people, it is a way to get out energy. It's a way to put their energy towards a goal. And now, as Victor mentioned, we need to shift the way that we think about many things.
Mm-hmm.
Mental health is something that I often wonder about, and I feel that there's not as much discussion on mental health as there is about the physical spread of the virus.
This virus is going to be with us for a long time because I think even with a vaccine, I think the scientists are saying this will be with us. We just have to learn to deal with it like with other things until eventually there will be a more effective vaccine that stops it altogether. But for the time being, taking precautions so not to spread it, and as soon as the vaccine is available, get it. But there are so many people also who are anti-vaccine. So how do we deal with that?
It's been interesting to see how the messaging around the unfolding of the virus, the messaging around what we should do, what we shouldn't do. And I think that we need to get some of our best PR people, our scientists, our public health people to come up with how do we address this so that people understand that it's safe, that people understand this is for the interest of everybody. And as Victor said, there's a different cultural element in Puerto Rico that makes people believe that they should do things for the goodness of the community. And we need to really shift our thinking that way here. Nobody questions waiting in line to go through security at a football game. Nobody questions the way that they do traffic after a football game down by the stadiums. Nobody is questioning that, but for some reason we're questioning wearing masks to prevent the spread of a virus during a pandemic.
Right. Well, there are many things where people have to be forced to comply. You might recall how after 9/11, traveling, going through an airport became a more difficult process, and going through checkpoints and making sure that you were lining up on the right uh, part of the airport to be allowed to go in. Even if you have TSA, if you have a special document to go in, you still have to comply with, you know, the luggage, the check-in point, and all that. So
I think, as Victor said, we get so tied to the beliefs that we have that shifting those is really hard. And we did it for the most part with the security, as you mentioned. But when we're faced with something that challenges what we believe, some people go along with it, trusting in the leaders or trusting in the authority. And then some people resist it.
yeah, yeah. Before 9/11, I never had to take my shoes off to go through the airport.
Well, in many other countries, you don't have to. And so I think that's what people, if you're wearing flip flops, which you can see, it's a piece of rubber this big. You can see
Right.
your whole foot, your toes, your flaws in your feet. And the TSA says, "Can you take those off?" It's hard not to say, like, what
Really?
what could be in this, but at that point they're saying, we're not the shoe police, we don't research shoes and how shoes could be radioactive. The rule is all shoes off, so just take the shoes off. And
And
I
this is
think that's
because the shoe bomber. You remember that?
I do remember the shoe bomber.
So that's when it all began with the shoes.
Right, right. But I think, I think it can go either way. That I understand the position of what happens when someone's wearing flip-flops that are this big and made of wood versus a thin flip-flop made of plastic. At that point, the TSA, they're trained to be agents of the government, to follow the rules and regulations, not to be flip-flop police. And so I think that's where us as individualistic Americans that love to pick our arguments need to say, okay, we'll take the shoes off.
Yeah. But anyhow, as I said, after 9/11, a lot of these rules changed. Now with COVID-19, a whole a new normal has uh, has been with us now for a few months, and
Absolutely.
is for the future. I don't see that changing quickly.
No, absolutely. So we are going to take a break. When we come back, I would love to hear more from you on your thoughts on some international news that hasn't gotten as much attention as COVID here in the United States. Fernando Mendez. We will see you back in a few minutes. I'm Karis Painter. This is Moves Unfiltered on Usula Media.
All right, you're good. We'll take about a minute.
Fernando.
Don't wait. Communicate. Make your emergency plan today.
Chapter. This is Moves Unfiltered on Usula Media. Today we have Fernando Mendez from the Roundtable joining us. Dylan Di Rosato is our sound engineer. Thank you for coming back in our marathon double show.
And here we are. I love this. What a great idea to do this double. We have to do it again.
I think this was your idea.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wow.
Yes.
Well, thank you to me then.
I will give you credit. So I wanted to pick your mind about some of international news that you had actually brought up to my attention. First, let's continue the conversation about COVID and the pandemic, focusing on Latin America. What's going on in Colombia?
Well, Colombia is one of those places where it has increased. Colombia, Ecuador, there are other countries in Latin America. Well, Brazil, we know about Brazil. Mexico was another place where there was a tremendous increase in numbers. So, and I think the government in Colombia has taken very strict measures to try to control it. But it's difficult for them. It's lack of resources again for many of these poor countries, Venezuela, and no. Let's face it. Latinos are not very disciplined to begin with, so they might have to do like Los Angeles, where the mayor stopped the water and electricity going into some of these homes where they could see from the helicopters that they were having big parties in Los Angeles. So they cut off electricity and water. So no more parties for those people. So they may have to do that in Latin America, in some of these countries.
That's so interesting. Wow.
People are having parties. And you can see pictures of people celebrating. I don't know what they were celebrating, but and not wearing masks and not taking all the necessary steps to control the virus. And so, unfortunately, from Colombia to Peru, Ecuador, that's where the numbers I have seen. Mexico, not much in Central America, but we just heard Victor say that in Puerto Rico it has spread also. So I think that has to do with our general mentality towards discipline.
Absolutely. And not only discipline, but culturally being close and spending time with friends and family. In the US, we tend to be a little more individualistic. Our time spent with family is much more limited. A lot of people, especially pre-COVID, didn't live in multi-generational houses the way that they do in South America. And it's hard. And also
Well, that's it. Multi-generational houses in Latin America is so common. We live with grandparents and little babies in the same house, for economic reasons, obviously. So many families are just piled up one on top of another. And so that's one way to spread the virus, and especially if the kids go to school. Imagine that.
Absolutely.
And that's also the risk here in the US, that even if the kids are safe at home, if they go to school and pick up the virus, they'll bring it home to their parents and grandparents.
Absolutely. And they're symptomless. And that's something we have to continue to remember is it's possible to spread the virus without having symptoms. And that's something that science has proven. And when you see these stories on TV about the hospital workers and they say over and over again what they're seeing, I don't understand why it's so hard for us to then follow the medical advice.
Well, it's hard to follow the medical advice because, again, here we go. Mr. Trump has undermined our faith in the institutions that would tell us the truth. CDC, Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx were hidden from camera view. Mr. Trump wanted to be the front man for COVID. So I don't know. That's ridiculous.
Mm.
Speaking of Trump now and the election, we haven't addressed the issue of Kamala Harris in more depth because so for the Republicans, she's more difficult than what they were hoping. Susan Rice, they were hoping to get her because that would revive the whole Benghazi problem that the Clinton-Obama administration had. Hillary Clinton had a difficult time explaining what happened in Benghazi. Obama didn't want that to sort of be part of his record because at that point he was Obama the infallible. So they didn't want to have that as part of his record, the Benghazi affair. And that would happen if Susan Rice came back on the national scene. That the Republicans would jump on that right away. But now Trump is using his old tricks. One of them that we already know because he used that in 2011. He began using that against Obama, that he was not born in this country. Remember that? He wanted to see his birth certificate. He said at one point, he said, maybe I'll link my tax returns to his birth certificate. If he shows his certificate, I will submit my tax returns. So here we are, almost a decade later. Nobody has seen Mr. Trump's tax returns. We did get to see Obama's birth certificate, the short form and the long form. And now he's using that as against Kamala Harris because her mother is Indian and her father is Jamaican.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and they're saying that she's an anchor baby, that Kamala Harris was an anchor baby. But it doesn't matter. Even if she was an anchor baby, she's an American citizen. She was born in the U.S. in California. So
and it really is fascinating if you think about the history of this country. Native Americans lived here, and most of us living here now are descendants of immigrants who came and either did great things or did not so great things when the Native Americans were here. And to attack people because of their birth history or where their parents from, I think people are getting tired of it, especially as many more people are either immigrants themselves, children of immigrants, or have friends or have coworkers. It doesn't resonate with a lot of people, that argument.
yes. Now, if that tactic doesn't work, he's already employing the other tactic, which is calling Kamala Harris all kinds of names. She's a mad woman. She's an angry woman because of her questioning of Judge Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court. Remember that?
I do.
Those hearings in which she was one of the harshest questioners of Kavanaugh. And now Trump is saying that she was angrier. She was angrier than anybody else on that panel. I don't know. She has the style of a prosecutor.
She was a prosecutor, and that's what they do. They ask tough questions, right? Because that's what you do as you don't get on and give a soliloquy about something. You ask questions in order to solicit information from witnesses, and that's what she was doing.
Right. So, and then she was a good questioner, and I think that put her on the national scene. I think that brought her up to the upper echelons of the Democrats will start thinking about her as a future leader, and
sure.
Here she is. I think she's a leader.
Absolutely. And to be a prosecutor, you are a leader because it is a government system that is set up to have due process. Mm-hmm. Whether the result is an acquittal or a guilty verdict, that's what they do. And I think going back to your point about the language that Trump was using is interesting. And what does that say about a person that they use words that to me sound like words that are used in on the playground, or when
Right.
somebody is at they're angry at somebody because they were hurt. To call someone a nasty woman who holds a national office, who's a senator, who was elected to office in a state that's the size of many countries, to me
So
seems very low and
exactly.
weak. A weak argument. At least attacked her for something that she did.
Right. This ad hominem attacks, in this case, ad femina attacks, shouldn't work because she's very strong on the issues and she's well informed and she's very well spoken. She's very eloquent in her expressions, more so than Trump. Trump has like crutches that he uses all the time, and this is one of them: putting nicknames on people and attacking them for personal things instead of ideas.
Absolutely.
So where is that battle of ideas? Where is that going to be at the debates? I want to see Kamala Harris sort of wiping the floor clean with Mr. Pence, because he's another guy who's not very capable of arguing.
Absolutely.
Repeatedly.
And don't you think, having been an educator, I think it'd be hard as any parent in the country to hear personal attacks that are not rooted in facts, that are just schoolyard names being leveraged towards people. As parents, you want to A, discourage that language, and B, like, identify what the person is doing that you don't like and bring that to the forefront. I think as parents watching the language that is being used, especially towards women, I feel like we're past that in this country. It doesn't resonate with a lot of people.
Absolutely. So, what would you consider the? You should be asking the questions, but
That's
I'm
okay. It's
reversing
a
the order.
conversation.
What do you think would be the main issues for the campaign? And we know about education, obviously. We know about the economy. That'll be another tough one. What else? What do you think?
For the election as a whole, or
the main issues that we should.
I think generally leadership, taking an issue such as a pandemic and saying, where is the leadership? Where is the plan? If you're not an expert in infectious diseases, who do you fall back on to then have a policy around it? And I think we haven't seen that. And I think that's what part of the Biden campaign continues to push, is there's leadership in his platform. Definitely education and valuing teachers. His wife has been a long time advocate and professor at a community college in Virginia. Talk about really being an advocate for education. Working in a community college, you see students who chose a route that might not have been as traditional, and they're seeking education in a different way than a 4-year college.
Right. How about healthcare? Because there are 40 million Americans with no insurance.
Absolutely, especially given this pandemic, and we tie healthcare in this country to work, and such as the gig economy that we brought up earlier. When you don't have a job that is then paying your insurance in this country, you don't have insurance unless you get on an insurance policy that is supported by the government, which is often run by the states. I think it'd be hard for people to say, I don't need government insurance during a pandemic if they don't have private insurance.
Right. Yeah. It would also be difficult to avoid the topic of race in this campaign, precisely because of the presence of Kamala Harris as part of the ticket. I think that's going to be difficult to avoid that topic. Absolutely. How do you see that hurts the Republicans?
There have been several articles, especially in the New York Times, that have come out from some Republican strategists who say, for years, I helped elect Republicans, or I worked on their campaigns. And they talked about caring for these different segments, minorities of the population. But in reality, the policies were never behind that. And part of it was a public relations campaign. And I think we are seeing that now. When the height of the protests, when Black Lives Matters was happening, the response from the government was not as strong as it could have been.
Mm-hmm.
I think the reaction from many people, regardless of race, is that didn't resonate with them.
Right. And then Mr. Trump decided that he was going to send troops to the cities to quell the demonstrations.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's and what they did in was it Portland? They sent this nondescript armed group to sort of represent the Justice Department. I guess they were. I don't know who they were. With they had no identities. They had no clear emblems of any sort. You didn't know what outfit they were representing. So it was like Mr. Trump's private army. It smacks me of the Hitler forces that really he had the same thing. He had like a private army. And so here's Mr. Trump probably doing the same thing with the help of the most unethical, inept Attorney General William Barr. And so that's what they're doing, right? I don't know.
Absolutely. You wanted to talk a little bit about Israel and the United Arab Emirates. Yes.
Yes.
That there was an accord between Israel and the United Arab Emirates.
Yes. And so what I said was, at any other time in our history, that would have been one of the biggest events of the year and probably of the decade, to have an Arab country declaring that they want to establish diplomatic relationships with Israel. And there's Netanyahu, who has been, I don't know how long he's been prime minister in Israel, but he was all happy with this. I mean, obviously, it's a coup for the Trump administration. I mean, I heard commentators this morning saying, like, yes, it's a good thing. It's a great thing. It's good news. It's a very positive development. And it's unfortunate that it happened during this administration. But because now Mr. Trump is going to use that to say foreign policy is my strength, which is like he's done everything else. 99% of what he's done in foreign policy is wrong, but here's one thing that he's going to hang his hat on.
Absolutely. Do you think the American people have a strong interest in foreign policy?
No, and especially during this era, because it's all about looking inside, about domestic issues. Nobody's really worried anymore about Cuba or Venezuela. But think about the last time you heard anything about Venezuela. And yet we have a Marxist government, a dictator who's putting the opposition in jail. There are two presidents in Venezuela right now. One we recognize, and the other one is Maduro, that some mercenaries tried to kill, and they ended up arrested by the Venezuelans. So, no foreign policy. It's not one of the main interests in this campaign, but it will be only because Mr. Trump will want to brag about Kushner's achievement with Israel and the United Arab Emirates. So that'll be the one thing. But everything else, he's given Putin a carte blanche to do as he wishes, attacking NATO and probably disseminating more of that ideology around the world.
Hmm.
Mr. Trump left the stage to Putin.
It's wild.
Yeah, now NATO is weakened. We don't have the Paris Agreement on weather, on climate change, and all that. We are out of there. Pacific Agreement on the economic front. NAFTA, he changed the name, even though it's still pretty much the same, but he changed the name. And I don't know what he's doing with the new president of Mexico, but anyway, that's another aspect that this administration cannot claim to have any strong record on foreign policy. I don't see it.
What do you think matters to the people of Pennsylvania?
At this point, the census, voting, because we have some problems with the machines that they acquired, and then they were too expensive and didn't work right. And because Pennsylvania is a crucial state in this campaign, so that's very important to go out and vote, to register and to vote, and either way, by mail or in person, make sure you vote. That's important for us. Jobs. Unemployment is high in Pennsylvania, as well as high around the country, but it's high here. For minorities, for Hispanics, all of those, healthcare, wealth creation. We're still poor, and Philadelphia is the poorest urban center, and in the poorest urban center in the country, we have the poorest neighborhood in the Hispanic neighborhood. So it's like double whammy there. Poorest than the other poor. So, and there's a lot of this urgency in the Hispanic community right now because of COVID, and there are no jobs, and people don't have money, and people who rent and cannot afford to pay their rent. Well, what are they going to do? I mean, obviously the government is doing something by extending the period in which landlords cannot just take you out of your house, but that will come to an end, and then what? And people still have no jobs. So those are really immediate concerns.
It will be very interesting to see. Now, you live in Center City.
Yes.
A lot has happened over the past couple months. I'm curious if the people of Center City feel that they want something different moving forward, given the protests, and then the buildings were boarded up, and some of them have opened, and because there's not the commercial traffic of people going to as many offices downtown. I'm curious from your point of view what it's like living in Center City right now.
Well, there are sort of two sides to that issue. Well, first of all, when the demonstration destroyed so much of the shopping areas of Center City, between Market Street, Chestnut, Walnut, very important businesses that were closed. Some of them were set on fire. But so slowly they have started to come back to life. They have reopened the Apple store, which was a big concern right smack in the center of the city on Walnut Street. It was depressing, and it's still somewhat depressing to walk around one street and see the Wells Fargo Bank branch still boarded up, to see so many other businesses that it says for rent or for sale because they are not coming back. The really burgeoning restaurant scene that was so vibrant in the last 5 years, 6 years in Philadelphia, that would make Philadelphia, actually put Philadelphia on the map nationally and internationally with great restaurants, all of a sudden is dead. For the most part, there are very few restaurants that have survived. There are very few restaurants that are dealing with this by having tables outside and all that. So that's going to take a long time to recover from this. And I think, as they say, well, 85% of the restaurants nationwide are not coming back. It's probably the same here in the city. A lot of them are not coming back. There are very few restaurants that survived so far by having takeout, and so that'll be gone. And then, as you say, office buildings, they will be empty. A lot of companies are not going to start bringing their people back into Center City for another year.
Absolutely.
So that's that economic activity, that branch of the economy here with kept supply stores and drug stores and restaurants alive, that's gone. So
we have about 2 minutes before we wrap up. I'm curious, because the show is traditionally about how people incorporate movement, physical movement in their lives. What have you been doing to stay a little more physically fit during this pandemic?
I'm glad you asked that question. Actually, I became part of a University of Pennsylvania study, and they sent me a Fitbit.
Wow, I love
And
it.
every day it registers my activity. And so I started increasing my steps from 4,000 to 5,000 to 10,000. And that's what I have stayed as a minimum. Most days, I would say 90% of the time, I get above 10,000. When I had a short trip to Vermont, and one day I did 21,000 steps, and that's like my record so far. And that was very good. So this is what I have done. I have adopted a new lifestyle. I exercise more, and I've been walking a lot. And what I need to control a little bit more is the diet, because it has to be a combination of both. But I think that I have used this period of time very well in that sense to get healthier.
Now, do they give you activities to do, or are they solely monitoring what you did before?
Oh, they have a whole thing where they tell you what to do, exercises to do, diet, and they have a like they do with all apps. They have one basic app, and then there's like a one that enhanced. If you want more stuff, they'll control your diet. They'll control everything that you do. So,
I love
yeah,
that.
it depends what you want to do.
That's wonderful to hear. I hope you keep it up. Will they let you keep the Fitbit forever and ever? Or do you have to give it back?
I don't know if they will, but I already have another one anyway. So
I love it. That's great.
Yeah.
Fernando Mendez, it has been wonderful chatting with you.
Karis, my pleasure. Thank you, my honor, and thank you for sharing your time with me. And we had a wonderful 2 hours. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Until next time, I'm Karis Painter. This is Moves Unfiltered on Usula Media. We've been graced with Fernando Mendez and Dylan DiRosato as our sound engineer. We will see you next time on Usula Media. Thank you.
Bye-bye.